this. So how it's gonna work is I'm gonna put a question up, and then you guys can type out your answer in the chat, and then we'll go through why, for example, C is the right answer, and as well as why A, um, B, and D aren't right. And then we'll try and see like, can we try figure out how to treat that question style in the future? So if you get it right or if you get it wrong, like one key takeaway for the next time you see that kind of question. Okay. Um, Let me share my screen. Okay, can you guys all see?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so for the first section, we'll go through verbal reasoning. You guys want to have a go at this? And I'll give you guys generally a minute per question, sometimes a little bit less. And for verbal reasoning, the key technique that I recommend is keyword searching. So try not to read everything. Instead, start with the statement, pick out a few keywords from here. So either Britain, urban areas, or people, and then go through here and try to figure out what specific point of this entire extract would have stuff about people or majority or urban areas. And then from there, you can answer the question a lot quicker. Yeah, a lot of you have already answered it and you've answered it right. And again, the correct answer is A, true. It says 90% of us live in cities or towns. So again, the actual phrase urban areas doesn't ever come up. You've got urban realities here, you've got cities and towns here. The thing is, a synonym is still a direct statement. And one of the main ways they'll kind of trip you up if you purely keyword search is they won't use the exact word as they use in the question. So sometimes they will use the exact word, maybe near the start of the question, they'll talk about urban areas, and then near the end, they'll kind of contradict themselves, or they'll use a synonym for what they say in the sentence. Because I think they kind of know a lot of people just blindly look for proper nouns, numbers, percentages, and just go through this without reading and understanding. So what I kind of want you guys to kind of do is when you're trying to keyword search, try to pick out at least five different things. So in a small statement like this, it's very hard to do. But if you have a longer question, then in that case, try pick out five unique different parts of the question. So here, Britain would be one, urban areas would be another, people would be another. And if they had more bits in the question, then pick out a couple more. So as you're going through it, you're not just looking for a specific number, or you're not just looking for a specific proper noun. You're looking for where they might be talking for that. So it's not just purely pattern matching, like what word you're seeing. Try to figure out like synonyms as well. Most of you got that quite quickly as well, which is good. Um, yeah, again, so for true false can't tell, most of these questions you should be doing with keyword searching. I'd strongly suggest you never read the passage first because it's very hard to average 30 seconds per question if you're spending a good like 45 seconds at the start of set four by reading the passage. So you start by reading the statement, the question stem, and then pick out your set of five keywords, scan the entire passage, and read whatever sentence the keyword fits in. So if you can answer it straight away, answer the question. If you can't answer it, then maybe you read the sentence before and after, and then try to answer the question. And again, as I said, the best keywords are proper nouns, numbers, percentages, dates, stuff that um, doesn't usually come up in different paragraphs. Um, but yeah, okay, next question. Uh, as soon as you're done, try to and an answer in the chat. Okay, again, I'm going to assume a lot of you have answered the question because I'm seeing a lot of A's. And yeah, the correct answer is true. And again, it's kind of similar earlier. If you purely picked up the 12, it would be quite hard for you to see the number 12 and you wouldn't be able to answer the question. So instead, try pick out forested, UK land, and the percent. So here you've got 90% here, and as well as percent here. And again, 4 times 3 here would lead you to 12. And again, the main point I'm trying to make is most of the questions you should be keyword searching for, but that doesn't mean on the UCAT every question will be as straightforward as you can read the statement, pick out a few keywords, and then they'll just present it to you in the second paragraph or the third paragraph. Sometimes they might contradict themselves and use the keyword over and over again. Other times, if it's especially maths based, expect to do a simple like addition or multiplication calculation. Um, and again, even if the exact same keyword is in use, you might have to kind of make an inference. And in this case, you have to do a calculation. In the earlier case, you had to kind of infer, um, what was it? That if you live in cities or you had to infer that urban areas are cities. But yeah, a lot of you got that right. I think all of you got that right, which is good. Um, Another key thing is in the stress of the exam, popular answer for a question like this would be can't tell. And what I kind of recommend to my students is if you're going through true false, can't tell questions, in your head, think to yourself, can't tell doesn't exist. So as you're going through your first pass of this passage, trying to figure out where these keywords are, just think to yourself, I'm trying to either explicitly confirm this or disprove it. So if you've gone through the entire passage once and you don't have evidence to prove it or disprove it, then at that point you can try think to yourself, okay, so does the statement go beyond the passage? Does it bring on any new information, or does it kind of talk about stuff that um, isn't exactly mentioned in a bit of the passage? But that kind of that gave me a lot more mental clarity when I was doing true false can't tell questions, because it's quite easy for people to kind of figure out, oh, it is true, but it's very hard for someone to figure out, is it false or is it can't tell? And that's where a lot of people kind of trip up. So in this case, since 4 times 3 gets you 12, it's quite easy to figure this out. Uh, if it was something else, it's quite difficult to tell, is it false or can't tell? So my advice for that would be try not to worry too much about can't tell and treat it as a last case where after you've gone through the entire extract, you try think, oh, does this statement actually go beyond the passage? Okay. Um, the last question. Oh, I think there is one more after this as well. Type it as soon as you've done it. Great. So a lot of you have said C, which is the right answer. And this kind of ties on nicely to the earlier question as well. So, how I mentioned earlier, they might sometimes change the words a little bit or drop a couple words, or they might go beyond what the text says in the statement. In this case, what piece of this passage is like, so where are we looking at in this passage? Can someone just type out what the key sentence is? Yeah, perfect. So the tallest broadleaf tree in England. So that's where you're looking at when you're keyword searching. So you picked out tallest tree, England or Dorset, and you've gone through and you can see tallest tree here. And the key point is the statement here has dropped the broadleaf, and all that kind of tells you is the tallest broadleaf tree is in Dorset. There could be a different kind of tree that is elsewhere in England that's taller than this broadleaf tree. And this is quite a common trick in verbal reasoning. They will usually drop like one word or add in another word. And if you're keyword searching, it's good to like stop and maybe read the sentence after or read the sentence before it just to get a little bit more context. So again, if you were to read the entire passage and understand it, you go through the answer too slowly and you kind of forfeit your speed. Whereas if you're purely keyword searching, your accuracy is going to drop off because if you're going as fast as possible, you're just going to see tallest, the England, Dorset, and just answer the question and get it wrong. So again, slow down a little once you find the exact sentence. Read the sentence it's in, try answer the question. If you can't, maybe read the sentence before it and the sentence after it. And yeah, okay. So it can't tell because a different kind of tree. So a conifer tree could be somewhere else in England that could be taller. And there's nothing that contradicts it. And there's nothing that says that this is the tallest tree. Although it says that it's the tallest broadleaf tree, there's nothing that says this is the actual tallest tree. So you can see how it's gone beyond the scope of the passage. Okay. And again, this qualifier trick you can kind of generalize and use as a guessing strategy as well. So what I mean by this is in verbal reasoning, if you've got like 2, 3 minutes left and you're just spamming C for every single question, a little trick that I used to do, and this wouldn't like guarantee the answer or anything, it's just marginally better than randomly guessing, is if you're really struggling for time, think about like what could be the fastest way to the answer. So in the statement, if they, I mean, in the passage, if they say something about the sky is always blue, okay, and the question wants you to try to figure out whether that's true or false. If the extract says the sky is always blue, then in that case, it's quite quick for you to just find one piece of evidence from the extract where they maybe mention that the sky isn't blue. So statements with extreme qualifiers are very easy to kind of disprove. So try look for counterexamples in that case. Whereas if the passage instead said, um, there's sometimes a cat outside my house, in that case, because of the word sometimes, that's a soft qualifier, which is a lot it has a lower burden of proof. You don't, even if you find one instance where there isn't a cat, it can still be true. So for statements like that, try and prove them. Just so you're just trying to find one instance where there is a cat outside the person's house. So you can use that kind of trick to kind of see, okay, so they've used an extreme qualifier or soft qualifier in the passage. In that case, I'm going to try find a statement where they're proving it or disproving it. And again, if they're using that in the text and they're switching to an extreme or soft in the statement, then you can even guess that it's either false or can't tell, or usually true. So say, for example, passage said, the sky is sometimes blue. And the question says, is it true that the sky is always blue? So again, they've gone beyond what the passage says. So it could be can't tell, or could be false. The opposite argument for this would be in the passage, if they said the sky is always blue, whereas in the question they say, oh, sometimes I can see that the sky is blue, then in that case, it's usually true because this would have lower burden of proof as that. Okay, a new passage now. Again, so this is a different style of question. It's not true, false, can't tell, so it might take you a little bit longer. Um, so just answer it whenever you're ready. Okay, a fair number of you have answered the question, and I think you've all got it right. The answer is C. But before we kind of go through why it's C and not the others, going back to my earlier point about using qualifiers to help speed you up. So if you read this question and then have just a skim read of A, B, C, and D, have a look at the qualifiers in the options before you go back in the text. So C says some people, Whereas A, B, and D, they all make sweeping claims. So self-service checkouts do more harm than good. They save money. They require no staff, most people. So in these kinds of questions, where one of them is talking about some people, it usually makes sense to start with C and verify whether C is true. And once you've figured out C doesn't check out, then you can go through A, B, and D because it might take you maybe 20 seconds to go through A, B, and D, whereas it could take you 10 seconds to go through C. So if you do get lucky and the answer is C, you've managed to do this question in 10 seconds and move on. Um, So sometimes it is going to be useful if you have a skim read of A, B, C, and D and think to yourself, what out of these four is going to be the fastest for me to validate, and then go through the next fastest and the next fastest instead of just going through A, B, C, and D. So you can save like a good 10 seconds if you're doing this methodically per question. Okay, but all of you have gotten this right, I think. So um, again, I think we can just skip answer to this question because it's already been 20 minutes and we're kind of running out of time. So again, check the qualifiers. Even if it's half right, it's generally wrong. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll take so for true false can't tell and leading comprehension questions, maybe the first half of the statement that they're talking about is true. So they'll talk about it explicitly in the passage, and then they'll go beyond the scope of the passage in the second half. So if any part of the full option fails, um, it's generally just wrong. And as soon as you've kind of figured out, okay, so C is the right answer, I've spent 10 seconds figuring out C is the right answer, just click it and move on because um, it's so much more valuable to save that extra 10, 15, 20 seconds and spend on a different question than for you to kind of be a little bit more confident that you have actually gotten this question right. Okay. So the next section is decision making. If you guys have any questions on any of the questions so far, just leave them in the chat. I can read them as I'm going along and I can answer them as well. And with decision making, for verbal reasoning, the main difficulty comes with time pressure. So regardless of how good you get at verbal reasoning, the main thing that's going to be holding your score back is time pressure. So your ability to go through passages quickly, your ability to not be fatigued by going through different sets of passages and answering questions over and over again. Whereas with decision making, you've roughly got a minute per question. But at the same time, it's the most varied as well. So you've got logic puzzles, syllogisms, Venn diagrams, probability, evaluating arguments. So what I generally recommend to all of my students is for each of those question styles, you should have your own way of approaching it. So for example, with logic puzzles, I would draw a certain kind of diagram if I saw a certain kind of question. And if I saw a different kind of question, I'd draw something else on my whiteboard. If I saw a drawing conclusion question, then I try see is it going to be quicker if I draw a full Venn diagram or if I use the arrow method or if I try to do everything in my head. So the whole point behind decision, so how people get faster and better at decision making is they'll start experimenting with different strategies and then they'll eventually find something that works for them really quickly. Because you do have plenty of time. The difficulty is trying to figure out what is the fastest way to the answer and making sure you're getting good high accuracy. So again, have a go at this question and just answer them as like yes, no, no, yes, like all in one sequence of four. But don't just put yes as soon as you've answered A. Yeah, perfect. A lot of you have gone this right. Again, a nice easy question to start us off. Um, so again, in the first sentence, we know that everyone except Jack likes tea, so we don't really know whether Jack actually likes coffee. So we can't really answer that question. The next one, the only person that could possibly not like tea is Jack. Just the same sentence. And again, and more than one person likes coffee doesn't really um, give you any, it might make sense. Like Jack isn't required to like one of them. Um, and the last one, at least two people like coffee. So at most, Jack fails to like tea. So even in the worst case, Jack is a coffee drinker, then must be a second coffee drinker who also must like tea. Okay, yeah, all of you have got it right. And again, for these questions, the way they're marked is if you get all of them right, then you will get 2 marks. If you get 4 out of 5 right, then you get 1 mark. And if you get 3 out of 5 right, then you get no marks. So generally, I do recommend spending a good 2 minutes on each of these questions because they're worth twice the marks as others. And don't be in a position where you've spent maybe a minute going through half of the question and then you're rushing and you have to guess the rest. It's better to just make a decision at the start of the question. So have a read of the question, determine is this something that I can actually invest 2 minutes and I won't be stressed for the rest of the subtest, or is it something maybe I should skip and devote this time for a Venn diagram or an evaluating arguments question? Because if you're getting 3 out of 5, it's basically pointless. You just wasted 2 minutes. Okay. Um, yeah. Do you guys want to have a go at this? Yeah, yeah, good. A lot of you have gone right. I think the main point where some people are getting some of the answers wrong is between C and D. So we'll go through that. So with C, um, again, the answer is no, because zero vans could be blue. Some has to be guaranteed. So because they've used the word some, that means at least some of the vans have to be blue. Whereas in this case, there is a possibility that zero vans could be blue. And D is yes, because there's only two kinds of vehicles. So cars and vans. And if there's no red vans, then every red vehicle has to be a car. So no, 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 yes. And the fastest way would just literally be write, if you just write on your whiteboard, 30 cars, 20 vans, and then just write 15 blue cars, 15 red C, red van 0. So from here, instead of going back to reading this over and over again and maybe confusing yourself, if you just try write this in shorthand, it can help save some time. So can someone explain why a Venn diagram wouldn't be useful here? Yeah, so it would take too long, but also this set has been already fully counted. There's no real overlap. Yeah, exactly. So there's no overlap between vans and cars. So it doesn't really make sense if you were to use a Venn diagram, even though a question like this looks like, oh, maybe they'd wanted to figure out 30, 50, and figure out 20. So, and, yeah. Okay, next question. Uh, this one is a little tricky, so take your time with this one. Um, I've seen a few answers, so we'll go through the question. Um, okay, so for the first, okay, so as soon as you see something like this, try to think to yourself, what is like the flow of information? So in this case, if it's edible, so all rice is inedible unless it has been boiled. It's always necessary to make rice edible. So in this case, what I would want to do is on my whiteboard and just write edible or even the letter E and draw an arrow to boiled and salt. So maybe the letter S and draw an arrow to write edible. So that is basically these two sentences. And the next four, A, B, C, D, are going to be either the same sentence repeated. They're going to maybe put a no in front of one of the statements, or maybe flip the order of boiled, edible, salted, or flip both. So put no and flip both. So the answer for the first one, A, is no, because it says if rice has been boiled, it must be edible. It doesn't really make sense because boiled but unsalted rice is still inedible. So just because it's been boiled, it doesn't tell you whether it is actually edible. Um, I'll give you guys a good example after we've gone through this question as to how to think about these questions. But okay, so the next question, B, if rice is edible, it must have been boiled. Again, that makes sense. It's literally the same as the first statement up here. C, if rice has been salted, it must be edible. Again, this would be no, because just because it's been salted doesn't tell you it must be edible. And D, edible rice must have been salted and boiled and salted. Um, and yeah, it requires both, so it makes sense. But the key thing I want you guys to pick out is A and C are basically the same mistake twice. So all they've done is flip the order of the statements. So here they're talking about rice edible as the first part of the statement, and they're giving you what it is. Whereas here they're saying if it has been boiled, it must be edible. Or if it has been salted, it must be edible. So what I mean by this is this kind of logical trap comes up quite a bit in the UCAT. And the example I want you guys to kind of work through is if I said, um, um, okay, let me think of a good example. Mhm. Okay, I'll get back to you with a good example later. Essentially, if you guys want to have a read of what the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive is, it can help you kind of figure out these kinds of puzzles in decision making where okay, actually, let me see if I can find an example. So just give me 1 second. Mhm. Okay, so let's say I give you guys this statement. I'll send it in the chat so you can have a read. Um, let's assume that this statement is true. Okay, so if the shape is a triangle, then it's a polygon. So let's just assume that is what they give you. It's like question. So that's what you take to be true. And then one of the drawing conclusions questions is this. Yeah, can you guys tell me whether this is true or false? The answer to the question we just did was no, yes, no, yes. Sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. It's just in the chat. So take the first message as what they give you in the question stem. And therefore, if the shape is not a polygon, it cannot be a triangle as the question. And they want you to figure out, is the second statement true or is it false? Yeah, so the answer to the second statement is true. So if the shape isn't a polygon, then it can't be a triangle. So that kind of makes natural sense. Let me give you guys another statement that's quite similar. So it looks similar to the second statement. I want you guys to figure out, is this true or false? Yeah, perfect. And the easiest way to think about this is just think of a square because um, the shape, let's say the shape in this case is a square. This a square is a polygon and it's not a triangle, so the statement is false. I'll give you guys the last way that they can ask you this kind of statement. Is this true or false? Yeah, perfect. So what you guys should kind of recognize from this is if you go back to the very first message I sent, if the shape is a triangle, then it is a polygon. If you take the first, if the shape is a triangle as A, in the second half, then there's a polygon as B, or something like this. If you kind of have that in your head or have that in your whiteboard, regardless of what kind of question you're doing, so they could just give you different words here and it would still kind of apply. Then you can kind of figure out what they've done. So let's look at this again. So the second, so in the second question I gave you guys, what's happened is they've flipped the order and they've inverted the statements. So instead of talking, so they've said, therefore, if the shape is not a polygon, it cannot be a triangle. So you can see that the order of A and B has been flipped. And what we're actually dealing with is if it's not B, then it's not A, which in that case is true. And this is called the contrapositive. And third one, all they've done is just flip the order. So if the shape is a polygon, then it's a triangle. This is called a converse statement and it's false. And then the last case, therefore, if the shape is not a triangle, then it's not a polygon. This is called an inverse statement, and all they've done is put a no. So if you can kind of recognize these sentence structures, it can help you kind of speed up on these questions because I've seen a lot of these questions come up time and time again, um, especially in decision making, where they want you to figure out stuff like this, where they'll tell you an object here, a relationship here, and then they'll kind of flip it or put a no or talk about it being edible or inedible. And it can kind of save you some time. Okay, so let's move on to, so this is kind of what I was talking about in the chat again. Uh, okay, so do you guys want to have a go at this question? Yeah, so let's work through each of the conclusions. Um, so the first conclusion, some hens are birds. Okay, so let's go back to the statement. So the hens that um, in the overlap, so from the first sentence, all fish are birds, and from the second sentence, some hen are fish. Mm. So can we conclude that some hens are birds? Can someone answer that in the question? Answer that in the chat. Yeah, perfect. That naturally follows. Now, the next one, no birds are hens. Um, Could someone give an explanation for that? The first one follows. I'm reading the explanations for the second one. Some, some hens are fiction. Yeah, so the second one doesn't follow because we kind of proved earlier it's exactly the opposite of that. Uh, yeah, so the first one follows and the second one doesn't. And I think a lot of you could do. Yeah, right. Um, okay, let's go through QR. I don't think we'll have time to go through SJT. Do you guys want to go through SJT or QR? I wanted to have some time for questions at the end. Okay, we'll go through QR. Okay, so again, QR is less time-pressured than verbal reasoning. But again, the main thing that slowed me down, and this is like my only regret from my UCAT, is um, what I kind of believed for the first maybe 4 weeks of my UCAT preparation was if I got faster and faster at using the number pad on my keyboard, then I'd be faster at answering questions, and then I'd be able to do more questions in QR. Uh, I think the main thing that limits you eventually is like if you're going through QR and you're having to write stuff down on your whiteboard or use the on-screen calculator or a number pad, you are like physically slowing yourself down each time. And it's much better for like literally everyone to just focus on building up their mental maths. So try limit your calculator use as much as possible. Try limit your need to write down maybe intermediate steps and calculations as much as possible. And then you'll naturally see after maybe 2, 3 weeks of like trying to do everything in your head that your mental math skills are like drastically improved and you're able to go through a lot more questions a lot quicker. Because generally the questions here, if the question is kind of hard, then it won't take too long. There's probably a quick trick that you can use for that. Um, is most of the maths is mainly GCSE level, and the questions that involve a lot of calculations, they are the ones that you really need to watch out for because they're only worth 1 mark. You're going to spend a good minute going through all the calculations. So stuff like tax brackets or time zones, where you have to write down a bunch of intermediate steps. If you can try and do more of that in your head and maybe chain a lot of those answers together into your calculator as just one calculation, and you'll be able to go through them a lot quicker. And that's a skill you need to practice more than getting comfortable with on-screen calculator. Okay, so let's get started with this question. All of you are saying B, but I think that is the answer. And we'll go through this as well. So the first thing you want to do is kind of figure out they're both running the same track, right? So or you can just convert Jamie's time into hours and then figure out what the distance is. So 25.2 miles, divide it by Daniel's speed, and whatever that difference is the speed. I mean, how much faster Jamie is running. Um, but the kind of key point behind this, so this is quite an easy question, is watch out for units. So again, minutes and hours. So converting it from this to this earlier is going to make your life a lot quicker. Uh, yeah, I think everyone got that right. So you can just move on. Okay, a fair few of you have answered, and yeah, the right answer is A. And the steps are you've got roughly 350k here, and if you have 5 events, you can divide it and get the average. So 350k divided roughly 70k. And then it says that there's been a 12% increase in year two. So whatever that is, so it'll probably be slightly under 70k. So times whatever that is, maybe 67 or 68,000, times that by 1.12 to get um, like that number. And then it says here that there's also 6 events. So times the year two average by 6 to get the total number of people, children that participated in year two. And I think that in QR, a lot of these questions are deliberately designed so that people like they'll see a number and they'll see the same number on their calculator and they'll be like, okay, so I've seen this, it's probably the right answer, and go ahead. So I think 7,112 was the year two average and not the year two total. So um, the number itself is correct in your calculation, but it's not the number that the question asked for. And again, if especially when you're going to sit the UCAT, it's very common for people to make mistakes like this. Um, and there's not much you can do. Like they do build these questions with the intention of throwing you off like this. Like every single answer option between A, B, C, and D, they'll make it so that someone that's made an intermediate step wrong will end up with answer option B, or maybe one of the intermediate steps themselves will be answer option D. So again, practice can help you. Um, the, this was okay, so someone has asked it can only be A due to it being larger than 350k. So the reason that doesn't so that is good intuition to think like that, but at the same time, because you've got 350K here, what the entire calculation is divide by five, and then you're timesing it by 1.12, and then you're again timesing it. Oh, so yeah, the answer to the first question was 2.8. Okay, so in this case, between A, B, C, and D, you can just guess that A does make sense, that is larger, but if they used closer numbers as well, it would be harder for you to kind of um, guess whether it is A. Again, that intuition does make sense in this case. Okay. Um, yeah, because you do end up multiplying it by six, which is greater than five, and you're also increasing by 4%, which is going to give you something greater than 50,000 as well. A quick way they could stop you from doing that is just maybe putting 463,000 there. Okay. Do you guys want to have a go at this? And so some of you are saying A and some of you are saying C. So we'll kind of go through this question properly. So in a mixture of 60 liters, the ratio is 2 to 1. So first, the easiest way to go about this is just figure out how much milk and water do you have. So you have 40 liters of milk and 20 liters of water. And the only thing that they can do in this question is add water to change the ratio. The milk itself is constant. So you started with 40 liters of milk, you're going to end with 40 liters of milk. So all the question's asking to do is, if I've got 40 liters of milk, how much do I need of water to get a 1 to 2 ratio of that? So our ratio would be 40 to 80. And since you've started with 20, we can add 60 liters to get to 80. Um, I think uh, I'm not too sure why some people have said C. It might be that you've like just halved it at the start, maybe, or flipped them too. But does that make sense? Yeah. So we've got five more minutes for any questions you guys might have. Mm. I'm guessing you all are at different stages of UCAT prep. So again, feel free to ask any questions, whether you're just starting out or you've got your exam in a few weeks or days. Yeah, we can go back. My biggest tip for improving speed in QR is um, basically just focus on mental maths as much as possible. So even if a question looks like you can't attempt it with mental maths, try force yourself to use mental maths for that. So what I mean by that is, in the last 2 weeks before my exam, I tried to do maybe 10 to 15 minutes of QR where I didn't like give myself pen and paper or use the on-screen calculator. So I could only rely on mental maths. And again, for certain questions like tax brackets where you have to carry over sums and then increase it by 20% or like find out what 40% of a certain value is, that's basically impossible. But you'll start realizing that how these questions are designed, there are sometimes certain tricks that you can use to get to the answer quicker. So for example, if you've got two large numbers multiplied by each other, you can look at the last digit. So maybe realizing that the last digit is two and the last digit is six. So if you multiply them together, the product has to end in a two and use that. Or even like just basic stuff like you're multiplying an even by an even, so the answer has to be even, or looking at the magnitude. So if you're forcing yourself to kind of rely on mental maths, you don't necessarily have to kind of go through that every single step in your head. Instead, try think of what could be the fastest way to the answer. In terms of effectively reviewing mock tests, what you should be worried about is um, time and accuracy. So what I mean by that is for verbal reasoning, I'd look at how uniform my time is per question. So for a question that I attempted, do I kind of roughly have 40 seconds per question, maybe 28, maybe 32? Or do I kind of spend 60 seconds on one question? And does that make me have to kind of guess five in 2 seconds? And as well as that, for the questions I genuinely attempted with a good 40 seconds or 30 seconds, have I got all of them right? If I haven't gotten them right, have I like made a mistake where I've genuinely believed maybe A was the answer and C was in fact the right answer? For those, I'd keep a log of like, this is why there was a trap. So I had a Notion document. So every time there was a question that I got wrong, not because of time pressure or me just guessing the wrong answer, if I genuinely believed the answer was A and I saw that, okay, in this case, it's not A, it is C, then I write down, this is the question I got wrong, this is why I got it wrong. And as well as that, the next time I see this structure of sentence or this kind of question, this is what I should watch out for. So an example would be like, if they gave you the statement, this person is a teacher in charge of educating students. If I've only seen evidence for them being a teacher, then I'd click true. And then the answer explanation, they'd explain that they don't have evidence of them actually educating students at the school or something. Then I'd write that down, being like, if they use the sentence structure, then they're referring to two different claims. Um, what would you recommend to improve ER? So my So my recommendation of practice is 6 weeks. So break that 6 weeks up into, it depends on how much time you have. So if you're starting from scratch and you've got as much time as you need, to book whatever, you can set the exam. So what I tell all my students is practice for 6 weeks, break it up into two blocks. So in the first block, try focus on getting familiar with the question. So focus on untimed practice and maybe subtest mini mocks. And as soon as you get to the last 3 weeks, try sit a mock every single day. And that's what's going to build your confidence up. Um, so I would try steer clear from untimed as soon as possible. So as soon as you've seen like every single style of question and verbal reasoning, you've gone through like author's opinion, um, maths-based questions, hypothetical questions. At that point, instantly just move on to timed questions because the difficulty in VR does come from the time pressure and not the actual comprehension. Um, I have 4.5 weeks until my UCAT. I'm doing mini mocks right now. I'm not sure what scores I should be at. Uh, but I wouldn't recommend tracking like the number scores. It's better if you track your raw marks. So um, the number score kind of fluctuates depending on how other people perform as well. But if you're consistently, um, I can't, like, there's no real answer to that. 4.5 weeks is still a long time. Um, yeah, so that is probably the highest yield piece of advice that I give all my students. So as soon as you start a subtest, don't just go through it question by question. Start by triaging every single question on the subtest. So skip through certain types of questions that you don't like. So for example, in verbal reasoning, after you've done 6 weeks of practice and you realized you're really good at people's can't tell, but you kind of suck at author's opinion and you perform well when the text is based on history, but you're really bad when it comes to science. Then in that case, when you're going through your actual exam, if you see something that's science-based, maybe don't do it straight away and save that for later. So try to guarantee yourself a lot of those easy marks near the start. So as soon as you see a question, have a skim read of what the text is about. So are they talking about maybe someone's biography, history, is it science, is it philosophy? Look back to how you perform on that question based off your medifying and your meta-entry marks. And as well as that, look at the style of question. So is it author's opinion? Is it um, something where you have to go through all four statements? and make a quick decision, maybe within 10 seconds. Is it worth me doing this right now? Should I come back to this later, or should I just fully skip it? So guess it and just blank it out. So don't come back to it at all. Um, to improve SJT, uh, I would recommend you so have a look at the UCAT Consortium's official website, and they have, I think, four SJT mocks, as well as like a big SJT question bank. And just go through all those questions and try read every single answer explanation, even if you get it right, because um, the problem with SJT is you can get yourself to band two quite comfortably, but it's very hard to kind of consistently get band one or band two, depending on like what platform you're on. Because a very similar question on med entry that says this is band one, it'd also just be like a band two partial mark on Medify or something like that. So don't worry too much about like consistently getting band one. Um, if you're getting partial marks for most questions, that's still a good sign because, again, the best way to improve is by reading answer explanations. Try keep the UCAT consortium's explanations as your gold standard, and then do modified questions after to supplement. Because I think the way they make these SGT questions as well is what they end up doing is they'll get like a panel of doctors, nurses, medical students, and they'll give them the questions and they'll be like, you guys to discuss among yourselves and figure out would this be an appropriate response? Would it be an important response? And it depends on how similar you are to them. So it makes sense for you to kind of focus on the UCAT's official explanation rather than Medify's web entries. Um, I think don't practice SGT as much. For my 6 weeks before I sat for UCAT, I did 1 week of SJT at the start. I left it for 4 weeks, and I did like a couple of days near the end of the exam, like near like when my exam was approaching. Because SJT is completely different to the first three subtests. It's not time pressured at all. You'll be able to read questions over and over again, maybe go back to questions and come back to them. And the problem with that, as you kind of mentioned, is people do tend to overthink and they'll maybe change their answers again and again. The best thing you can do about this is just maybe do more practice and start seeing the patterns. So once you've seen the question once, um, it will be a lot easier for you to answer that same question again if you can recognize that you've seen the question once. And I'm not too sure what you mean by at least two, exactly two faster. But again, if you guys don't have any questions, um, feel free to leave. I think that is the end of the lesson.
Thanks, Pod, for taking on today's session. Hope you guys all got a good practice out of today's session. If you do want one-to-one tutoring for UCAT, we are offering that. So just drop me a message on WhatsApp and I can get that arranged for you. Other than that, I hope everyone has a lovely evening and we'll see everyone next Sunday at 5 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.